You can go to the east, find your inner hemisphere. You say we're under the same sky, babe. Don't you realize, honey, it's not that clear. I'm not your promised land. I'm not your promised one. I'm not the land of Canaan, oh sweetheart, waiting for you under the sun. I'm lonely tonight, I'm missing you now. I'm wanting your love and you're giving it out. I'm lonely tonight, I'm lonely tonight, I'm lonely tonight. Ooh, yeah. Well, the meaning has changed for what it's worth. It's just a senseless game. I should think of love, but it's fear every time I hear how your heart beats strange. It's not the falling man, it's not the call of tide. It's just the London skyline, oh sweetheart, telling me you're not mine. I'm lonely tonight, I'm missing you now. I'm wanting your love and you're giving it out. I'm lonely tonight, I'm lonely tonight, I'm lonely tonight. Ooh, yeah. My blood is running dry, my skin is growing thin. For every time you find yourself, I lose a little bit of me from within. It's just a rage inside my veins. Why can't we bring it on to the end of the line? From inside this existence, oh sweetheart, time is not on my side. I'm lonely tonight, I'm missing you now. I'm wanting your love and you're giving it out. I'm lonely tonight, I'm lonely tonight, I'm lonely tonight. Oh yeah, I'm not your promised land. Lonely, I'm not your promised one. I'm not the land of Canaan, oh sweetheart. I'm not your land of Canaan, oh sweetheart. I'm not your land of Canaan, oh. Waiting for you under the sun. I'm lonely tonight.
Both Indigo girls, Amy and Emily, grew up in the Methodist Church. Emily's dad is a United Methodist minister and professor of theology, and Amy was a religion major in college. So biblical themes often find themselves in their songs. This song, The Land of Canaan, speaks to the metaphorical meaning of the promised land. To me, the lyrics sound like a lover who is cautioning her beloved. The one she misses is out loving someone else. The songwriter warns that she will not stick around for forever. She says, I'm not your promised land. I'm not your promised one. I'm not your land of Canaan waiting for you under the sun. This song stood out to me right now because of the chorus, I'm lonely tonight. How often have you shared about your loneliness during this pandemic? This song also caught my attention because of its title. The land of Canaan in the Bible has a long and complex history. There's no way to do it justice with long story short, but I'm going to do long story short anyways. And I apologize for not being able to address every issue associated with this promised land. Here goes. Genesis and Exodus. God created the world. An older childless couple named Sarai and Abram, who lived in a place called Ur, were promised that one day their descendants would be too numerous to count. God sent them to a place called the land of Canaan. At that time, people called the Canaanites lived there. But God said one day Abram and Sarai's offspring would be given that piece of land. God changed Abram and Sarai's names to Abraham and Sarah, and they started a family. A lot of drama transpired. And then their great-grandson Jacob had 12 sons and 1 daughter. The 12 tribes of Israel are named after Jacob's 12 sons. Shouldn't there be a 13th tribe named after the daughter Dinah? But I digress. One of those sons was Joseph with his Technicolor Dreamcoat. Joseph was quite queer, an outsider in his family. His brothers, exerting their toxic masculinity, sold Joseph into slavery. He ended up in Egypt and did some time in prison for a crime he never committed. Joseph was able to interpret dreams, so eventually his skills got him out of prison and into a top-ranking position within Pharaoh's court. A famine overtook the land of Canaan, and Joseph's family moved to Egypt to be closer to food resources. The family tree expanded, and the new Pharaoh began to fear the Israelites. He had them enslaved. God called Moses to get the people out of slavery and take them back to the promised land, the land of Canaan. After 10 plagues, a trek through the Red Sea, the giving of the 10 Commandments, and 40 years wandering through the wilderness, Moses finally saw the promised land while atop a mountain looking out across the River Jordan. But Moses died before making it into the land of Canaan. God called Joshua to complete the journey. Joshua battled at Jericho and other cities in the land of Canaan until the current inhabitants had been conquered. Joshua parceled out the land to the 12 tribes of Israel. I told you this was a complex and complicated story, but what story isn't? Next Friday is Juneteenth, an American holiday commemorating June of 1885, when news about the end of slavery finally reached all African Americans who were still enslaved in the South. Even though I revere the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with all my being, I told myself I wasn't going to be one of those white people quoting him on Facebook anymore. This is because so many white folks these days quote King in order to try and control how Black people protest. I am going to quote King, but it has nothing to do with me trying to control or dampen Black resistance or protest. I fully support, take guidance from, and wish to participate in protests against racial injustice and equality. The reason I'm quoting the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. today is to highlight the rich metaphor of the promised land for oppressed peoples. On the day before he was assassinated, April 3rd, 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a speech entitled, "I've Been to the Mountaintop." He was supporting the striking sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. It is a long, brilliant, and inspiring speech, which I cannot read in full without being moved to tears. But today I quote only a few small sections from his speech. Hear these words from the late prophet. "If I were standing at the beginning of time and the Almighty said to me, 'Martin Luther King, which age would you like to live in?' I would take my mental flight by Egypt, or rather across the Red Sea, through the wilderness on toward the promised land. And in spite of its magnificence, I wouldn't stop there. I would come up on even to 1863 and watch a vacillating president by the name of Abraham Lincoln finally come to the conclusion that he had to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. But I wouldn't stop there. Strangely enough, I would turn to the Almighty and say, 'If you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy.' Now, that's a strange statement to make because the world is all messed up. The nation is sick. Trouble is in the land, confusion all around. But I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. And I see God working in this period of the 20th century in a way that men in some strange way are responding. Something is happening in our world. The masses of people are rising up. Well, I don't know what will happen. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that right now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Let's get our black and brown folks to the promised land of liberty and justice for all. Allowing Black people to access the promises of our nation does not diminish the liberties or justice which are already enjoyed by a majority of white folks in America. The promised land is a space beyond the shackles of discrimination, racial profiling, income inequality, redlining, and segregation. In Matthew 7:7, Jesus says, "Ask and it will be given you, search and you will find, knock and the door will be opened." Black people have been knocking on the door of the promised land for over 400 years. If no one's going to open the door from the inside, I think it's time we take the hinges off. We need to use the tools of relentless, nonviolent resistance, protest, boycott, and the power of our Christian faith to follow one of the most important commandments in the Bible, to love your neighbor as yourself. May it be so. Amen.